Marisha here, and welcome to part two of my reaction to the article Why Americans Love Brits 21 Charming Traits. Now, if you missed the first part, you can catch that here, but let's dig in. Number 8, pubs over bars. Yes, British pubs beat American bars in charm for a few reasons. First is the architecture itself. You're talking about an older building. Often it has lower ceilings with exposed timber, like often the original wood. You can sort of imagine yourself in the middle of like Lord of the Rings with Strider sitting over in the corner. And then another reason why it's better or more charming is there's a more sort of community feel to it. It's more family friendly. It would be more normal and appropriate for parents to bring children into a British pub than it would be for them to bring them to an American bar. And then the third thing, which maybe not everybody would agree with me on, is the food. Because, I mean, I love bar food, right? A basket of wings, some mozzarella sticks, fried pickles. Yes, yum. But pub food is pretty nice, right? You got fish and chips, you got bangers and mash. And so maybe it's a draw on the food. It depends on what your mood is. But the first two reasons I think most Americans would agree with me. And so for overall, I think that yeah, pubs win over bars. Definitely more charming. Number 9, our cynical humor. I talked a little bit about the difference between British and American humor in the previous post, but I'll say a little bit more here, and that is that British humor does tend to generally be more dry, dark, um, cynical, right? American humor generally tends to be more lighthearted, broad, slapstick. I think that there are examples of either one in like the other country. I think especially Brits, when they talk about British humor and try to act like it's more sophisticated, conveniently forget about Benny Hill, for example. But it is true, there is generally a difference between the types of humor found in either country. Now, whether this belongs on this list is an interesting question because I would say that it's maybe about half and half in America for people liking British humor. And so I think that's a big enough number that I agree with it being on this list. That, you know, the Americans who love British humor. And I'd say it's maybe about half of Americans. But just be mindful of the fact that it's not as universal as some other things on this list, things like the accent or, interest in the royal family. But yeah, as someone who does love British humor, I agree with this being on this list. Number 10, our historical landmarks. Yes, Americans love us a good castle or old cathedral or ancient ruin. So I think that when Americans think about going to Britain or in fact plan on going to Britain, they're going to want to hit up like Stonehenge and Tower of London, and they're going to want to see Buckingham Palace, all of that stuff. It's not a uniquely British thing, though. The historical landmarks, that's true of basically anywhere in Europe. Americans are just going to eat up all of the castles and cathedrals. And so for that reason, they're going to love going to France to see all the chateaus and Notre Dame, and they're going to love going to Italy and seeing, like the Colosseum, things like that. So it is true, but I don't think it's uniquely British. Number 11, the British countryside. Yes, because Americans romanticize British countryside. We think that it is like what we see in Midsummer Murders or Miss Marple. It's these quaint little villages with the thatched roofs and the stone bridges and stone walls and cobblestone streets, lots of stone, basically. Um, and we just think, oh, look at this cute, quaint little village, and it's lovely, and they've got the little English garden gardens and little hedgerows, and wouldn't it be a lovely place to live, except for all the murder. But whether that's the reality of the British countryside, mm, but certainly it is something that I think Americans would point to as at least the romanticized idea of it. One thing I don't agree with, though, is this writer writes that we view it as an escape from the urban sprawl many Americans are used to. And that's not it. If we want to escape from an urban sprawl, we can get that in the States. It's very easy. We just hop in our car and we drive an hour, sometimes less. Um, it's the specifically, I think, the architecture that when we escape our urban sprawl and we go out to a rural community, the buildings are not little stone cottages with thatched roofs. 12, literary heritage. Yes, absolutely. As an English teacher, I always loved teaching British literature more than American literature. And that's not to say that American literature doesn't have like some great stuff. I mean, Edgar Allan Poe is the bee's knees. I love me some Ernest Hemingway. I think The Sun Also Rises is one of my favorite texts to teach. But when you're looking at British literature as a whole and American literature as a whole, I mean, it's no comparison. British literature. And a big part of that is that it's been around for a lot longer. You're going as far back as Beowulf, right? And so, when I'm teaching British literature, and for those who aren't familiar with the American school system, in most American public schools, which is what Brits would call state schools, the last year, 12th grade, which is so in Britain, sixth form would be our 11th and 12th grade. So our 12th grade, our seniors, most schools, that's British literature. When I'm teaching that, it's really easy to get kids interested in Beowulf and Canterbury Tales and Arthurian legend because even though it can be a little bit tricky with the language, right? You're talking about stories of adventure. You're talking about knights and you're talking about slaying dragons, and that's inherently interesting to kids. And then, you're moving on to things like Shakespeare, and, as I'm not a fan of Romeo and Juliet, but give me Macbeth, give me Hamlet, give me Taming of the Shrew. A lot of Shakespeare is really fun. And again, it really is just a matter of once you get past the language, the the themes themselves are well really universal. I mean, that's why we still study Shakespeare. And it is easy to get the kids interested once you can get them kind of over the language kind of barrier. And then and then you just keep going. There's so much to choose from. Romantic poets, and because there's so much to choose from, you couldn't possibly cover it all in one year. And so you do kind of just get to pick and choose your favorites, which makes it a lot easier. Absolutely, British literature, super charming, love it. And I think a lot of Americans, it's the same. I don't think your average American in the street is going to be like, yeah, I love Shakespeare, but they are going to say that they love Harry Potter, right? Or they are going to like Sherlock Holmes or Miss Marple, So yeah, there's, like I said, a wide variety of things to appeal to a wide variety of audiences. Number 13, our pessimism. No, and I don't know why you would put this on this list. I don't think anybody finds pessimism charming. And I'm gonna kind of go off here because they write that our natural pessimism is seen as refreshingly honest among Americans used to a culture of forced optimism and big smiles. And this is clearly written by someone who has never been to America. If you spend any time online, you will run into a lot of not just Brits, but Europeans in general, bashing Americans. And one of the things that comes up is that they think Americans are fake because we smile and we're friendly. Until someone will chime in the chat and say like, no, actually I went to America for this amount of time, or I lived in America for this amount of time, and they are genuinely like some of the friendliest people I've ever met. Like, no, that they're not being fake. um but it's a consistent like idea that we're somehow fake because we are overtly friendly and because we smile at strangers and say hi. And when people talk that way, they're really just exposing themselves as being unwilling to acknowledge cultural differences because it is baked into our culture. And this is why, for those of you who are interested, this is why Americans smile a lot. It's because of our very like founding, when the first European settlers came over, and you had people from Spain, France, England, Netherlands, Germany. You had some Gaelic speakers from Ireland and Scotland. You had all of these people who spoke all these different languages, rubbing elbows with each other. And the easiest way to communicate that you are friend, not foe, to communicate that you are being neighborly and you want to get along with one another, is to smile. And so you're talking back as far back as the 1600s and even earlier in some cases. And even Alexis de Tocqueville talks about this when he's writing about Americans, right? So it's like, this is not just me as an American trying to defend myself as an American. This has been observed by outsiders, by Europeans who came over and observed American culture. This has been baked into our culture and is a genuine thing. It's because we continue to be a nation of immigrants. And so it continues to be, you run across someone in the street, and they don't look like you, right? They're clearly a different race, or they don't speak your language, right? We still have, immigrants coming over where English is not their first language. And the easiest way to let them know that they are welcome and that you are not part of the far right, of try to avoid using expletives here, who are like xenophobes, is to smile at them. And so yeah, it is baked into our culture and it is very genuine. And so um the fact that they would write this just shows that they are clearly someone who has never been to America and might not have ever even met an actual American. And even if you weren't talking about Americans here, even if you're talking about anyone looking at British culture, why would you think anyone would think pessimism was a charming trait? Nobody thinks that. And finally, 14, football hooliganism. This is another entry on this list that showed up on the annoying list. And I'm not sure why it's on this list because, like pessimism, I don't think anybody finds that charming. You're talking about violence, you're talking about riots. That is the opposite of charming. And I really think that the writer of this article just took a bunch of British stereotypes and threw them all into this list and padded it out when they really should have made a shorter, more accurate list. So I won't go off on a rant about the hooliganism because I don't think it deserves it. I think it's pretty clear that no one really finds that charming and it shouldn't be on this list. But we'll see what is on the remainder of the list in our third and final installment. Until then, like, subscribe, tell your friends how gnarly this channel is, and I'll see you next time.